Hello, today we are going to talk about digitizing analog tapes. Hey, today we are going to talk about digitizing analog tape, specifically Betamax tapes. I have a whole stack of these things that I inherited from my grandfather. He was a big early adopter in the whole Betamax scene. He had the Beta movie camera, which was one of, if not the first, consumer grade camcorder that you could get. So as far back as I can remember, he had his camcorder out at birthday parties and Christmas and all sorts of different family gatherings and whatnot. Thing is, he never actually showed anybody any of the tapes. They just kind of sat in his office in a big stack. So this project has kind of been on my radar for years and years, and it's always been my intention to get these tapes and to actually digitize them, because I know that over time they're only gonna just degrade and disintegrate, and then no one will have ever seen these, and you know, it'd be nice to kind of actually relive some of these family memories and things like that. So this has been a big project on my mind for a long time. I never quite knew how I was gonna do it though.
But first you must travel a long and difficult road. A road fraught with peril.
So the first step in this whole quest was to get a hold of a working Betamax player, which turns out to be more difficult than I had imagined. I found a few at thrift stores. I found some on Craigslist, and I kind of went on this journey to get a hold of one that was in good working condition. And unfortunately, most of the ones that I got didn't work, or they ate tapes, or they just had, you know, they would power on, but they wouldn't turn tape, or they wouldn't accept tape, or there was some problem with it. So this turned into a real big, you know, kind of research project for me, and, you know, ended up joining a bunch of Betamax Facebook groups to kind of get a handle on how some of this stuff worked, and what could be you know, how to fix some of the problems that I found, and things like that. So I ended up learning a lot about the Betamax format and about how the players work, and I'm still not an expert by any means, but at least I've gotten some knowledge from it. There are not a lot of manufacturers made these. It was primarily Sony, although I did get a hold of a couple Sanyos. One of the Sanyos I have actually still works. It's a top loader. It's very old. It's probably the oldest one I have. I decided I didn't really want to use that for this project, because I wanted to try to get the highest end Betamax player that I could, just so that I could get the highest quality video capture that I could. So I figured a better, newer Betamax player would be a better quality capture. So like I said, I ended up getting a whole bunch of broken Betamax players, and one thing I learned was in Craigslist, a lot of people, and eBay and everything else, people will tell you things like, well, it works as far as I know, but I have no way to test it, or it worked fine when we put it into storage 20 years ago, so as far as I know, it still works. And I kind of call this the Schrodinger's Craigslist listing, whereas, you know, as long as you don't definitively know if it doesn't work, then you could sell it as possibly working. So I think a lot of people they feign ignorance, or they tell you they can't test it, or they just won't test it, because I think the underlying strategy to that is that if they do test it and they find out that it doesn't work, then the value goes down. So if they sell it to you as untested or they don't know, then theoretically it could work, so therefore it could be worth more. So I kind of found this out the hard way, whereas, you know, people, well, it lights up when you plug it in, so it probably works. I don't have any tapes, so I can't tell you for sure. And 9 times out of 10, these things don't work. So I ended up with a lot of broken Betamax players, unfortunately, but I didn't spend a ton, but probably more than I should have. But regardless, I did end up with a real nice Betamax player, and that ended up being the SL-HF900, which is a super Betamax player, which means that it is capable of basically a higher resolution or extra lines over the standard Betamax format. It doesn't matter that much, especially for this application, because in order to really take advantage of the super Betamax quality, you have to record the original tape in super Betamax format, which I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that the Beta movie camera was, well, I know that it came out well before super Betamax was a thing, so I know it doesn't record in super Betamax. And I don't think my grandfather ever had a super Betamax recorder. Most of these tapes, it turns out, are actually movies and TV shows recorded off TV, which actually holds an interesting value. I found in the commercials that are on these are pretty interesting little artifacts that you can't really find anywhere else. But these types of tapes, all the movies and things, you can get on DVD and even Blu-ray nowadays, so they're not particularly interesting. But I've found that the commercials themselves are kind of fascinating as little time capsules, and certain brands that don't exist anymore, and just things that look very ancient nowadays, even though they were only, you know, from the 80s. So those are things I'm also going to try to preserve in this whole project. So now that I have this Betamax player, this is probably the best one that I've come across, but it is nice to have kind of a high-end model. And I'll read you a quick excerpt from Mr. Betamax. He's kind of the authority I've discovered as far as Betamax stuff. Most of the Betamax experts and whatnot that I've come across refer to Mr. Betamax as kind of the expert, and if there's something you can't fix as far as a Betamax player, you can actually send your unit to him and you can pay him to repair it. So I looked up this model on his website, and this is what he says about it. The SL-HF900 was one of Sony's best-selling Super Beta Hi-Fi VCRs. Even today, it ranks tops in appeal among beta files. And why not? It produces one of the highest quality Super Beta pictures ever and delivers fantastic high-fidelity stereo audio. It was the first consumer beta to have a jog wheel and shuffle ring. This delivered mastery over video editing that was unobtainable before. The SL-HF900 is a great performer and will make that video and entertainment experience the thrill of a lifetime. One fine beta. So that's a little summary of this player. So I'm really happy that I ended up with this player. Whoever had it took great care of it, and it just worked right out of the box. However, it wasn't without its problems, and I did notice there was some issue where I would be playing a tape and the picture would just cut out. The sound would keep going, but the picture would just stop. So that was the first issue that I had to solve with this player, was why was that happening? So after some research on various forums and Betamax Facebook groups and things that I had to delve into, the recommendation was given to me to clean the heads, and so I learned how to do this, which was not something I'd ever done before for any VCR. So this was a brand new experience for me. So I opened this thing up and learned that there's various surfaces on these machines that you have to kind of clean, and different levels of care that you need to take when cleaning these parts. So there's the audio heads and the silver drum part in the middle, and all of these, the tape, what they call the tape path, is good to clean with some isopropyl rubbing alcohol, and you can use a Q-tip. They tell you not to use a Q-tip for a lot of this stuff, because the Q-tip can leave little bits of cotton and whatnot behind, but it seems to be, from what I've read, okay to clean like the audio heads and some of the other tape path parts with the Q-tip. That seems to be fine. So I did that, and then there's, in the silver drum area in the middle, there's a motor that spins the heads inside of this drum, which apparently is a little different than how the VHS VCRs operate. The way the VHS works is the whole drum assembly kind of spins, whereas the Betamax, the head is inside the drum and the head spins inside there. And if you look very carefully, you can see there's two little electronic heads, is what they are, and they kind of peek through this little opening that's inside the drum there. And so if you turn the little motor assembly at the top, you can kind of see those heads as they peek through. And there's on this particular one, this is a 4-head device, and you can see there's two little reader devices that kind of peek out if you turn it around. The thing about that is you can't touch those with your hands. You want to be very careful with those, because if you get them out of alignment, you're pretty much screwed. So there's a technique, and they say you can use paper for this. I didn't really want to do that because that didn't really seem quite like the best way to do this, but you can theoretically use paper that's soaked in alcohol and put it up against the head, and then carefully spin put it up against the drum and carefully spin the heads around so that they rub against that paper. So that's one way to do it. The other more professional way to do it is you can get these chamois sticks, and the chamois sticks are lint free. So that's why they tell you to use those instead of like a Q-tip or something, because the Q-tip, what'll end up happening is the heads will rip off some of the cotton that's on the Q-tip, and then it'll just clog up the whole thing, and you don't want that. So you need something that's lint free, that's not going to leave something or catch something onto the heads. So what I did was I got some of those. They're kind of expensive, it turns out, for what they are. I mean, they're not crazy expensive, but more than you'd really want to spend. I think it was like $10 for a pack of 12 or something like that. So they're not especially cheap, but I wanted to really do this right and to make sure that I got this cleaned well. So I spent the money for those, got them soaked in alcohol, put them up against the heads, spin them around. I did this a few times. It took a little bit of experimenting and things to kind of figure out how much I actually really needed to do this. And turns out you need to spin the heads around quite a few times to really do a good job of cleaning these. And as I did that, you have to pull the chamois strip away carefully. You don't want to pull it away and bump the heads or anything as you do this. You got to be very careful when you do this part. So after I was done, there was a nice line of dust that was left behind on on the chamois strip. So that's a good indication that you cleaned some stuff off. So that was good. I did that. I hooked everything back up, and then I found out there was also some white spots and things that were appearing in the video signal, and I couldn't figure out what that was about. So consulted the Facebook experts once again, and they told me that had to do with the audio settings. So I had to set the audio settings a certain way to make that go away. So it's nice to have experts and people to ask these questions about, because this is one of those things where just nobody uses these things anymore. And, except for a very small niche group of enthusiasts. So it's nice to be able to actually find those enthusiasts and be able to ask them these questions and get good answers. So thankful for the Betamax is Better Facebook group and a few of the other ones that are out there that have actually been pretty helpful in answering some questions that I've had. So finally got the whole thing cleaned out, got it working really well, got a nice picture on the TV. So I was pretty happy with that. So then I have an Elgato capture device that I've had for years. So this is going to be a composite signal into the Elgato device, and that Elgato device is going to go straight into my PC for the capture. I thought that's all there was to it, and it was going to be easy.
Wrong! Wrong? Wrong! Right? Wrong!
Turns out not so much. So that's a whole other thing.
Well, I pity the fool that makes that mistake.
So the Elgato device that I have is called the Game Capture HD. I think it's the first one that they actually came out with. It's a pretty good device, and it's got some pretty decent software that it comes with that you can use for the capture. I set it up as best as I could figure out. I mean, there's not a lot of documentation on how to do this, so I kind of had to figure it out as I went along. Wasn't the easiest thing, or as easy as I'd hoped, I guess. It was, I set the video input to composite, the analog audio, and just put the quality at best. I put the overscan on just because that seemed to give it a slightly bigger pictures. There's a few extra lines there. I did a lot of experimenting with, I kept it in the standard format. There's, I guess, some upscaling options here. You can select convert standard definition to 680 by 480. I tried that. I thought that would be a good idea to give me some extra resolution, but I compared it side by side, and the 680 upscan that it doesn't look as good to me as just the standard 480 that comes straight into the device from the VCR. So I also tried using various other upscalers that I have because of the retro gaming stuff that I do. I ended up with a whole bunch of different upscalers like the Retro Tink and Extron scalers and things like that. I did some experiments with those, and I didn't really like the results. I'm not an expert, so maybe I didn't have all the settings dialed in or something. I don't know. I just didn't think that it added really an improvement. Sure, there was a slightly bigger picture, but those pixels just aren't there. So it didn't really seem to, it just made it a little bit blurrier picture. Even though it was bigger, it was just more blurry. So I didn't think it was an improvement. So I ended up deciding just to capture the straight video off the tape and not change it in any way or try to upscale it. That ended up, I'm happy with those results. I think those are better overall. Just that's how I'm gonna do it, and I think it just looks better. The other thing that I discovered was, some of these tapes, and I think it's part of the beta movie and how it works. And I'm not going to go into great detail about how the beta movie works, but I will tell you that, you know, they figured out a way to cram a VCR basically into this beta movie thing, which in 1983 was no easy task. And to do it, they had to kind of cut some corners and do some things to really make it work. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but there is another channel called Technology Connections that actually does a really good teardown of the beta movie and tells you exactly how it works and why it works the way it does. So I'll link to that in this, but I'll just say that, you know, in these recordings, there's a few instances where the tracking kind of has a blip in it, and, you know, it's no big deal when you watch it on a CRT TV. You know, it's just a little bit of static comes up, or a little wave, or something will happen for a second. Not that big of a deal. Turns out the Elgato and pretty much any other capture device doesn't like that. And what ends up happening is, instead of just showing static in the capture or the wave or however it appears on the CRT TV, it will just cut the signal entirely. And, you know, with the digital device like the Elgato, it's either the signal's there or it's not. There's no halfway, which is kind of how it reads when there's signal. It's like, that's not a full signal, so it's off. So, you know, that's this very simplified way. It's either on or it's off. So that ended up being a big problem for me. And so I had to do another bit of research on why was that happening and how can I avoid it. And in delving into many old internet archives and forums and all sorts of stuff, of people that have been trying to do this, I discovered that the way around this is you need something called a TBC, which stands for Time Based Correction. And this is a method for fixing analog signals. And I'll read you the Wikipedia definition of this. Says it's a technique to reduce or eliminate errors caused by mechanical instability present in analog recordings on mechanical media. So how do I get it? Time-based corrector. Well, in delving into this, I discovered that there's a number of professional devices that you could get, and these can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. I wasn't going to do that. A lot of these forums were from, I think the most recent ones were around 2005, 2007. And a lot of those people were saying, you know, there were some consumer grade, semi-professional devices that you can get. And there were two in particular that were recommended highly. And in these forum posts, they're like, oh, you know, they're kind of expensive. They're around, you know, $300 for these devices, but it's worth it. So this was a thing that I had to go research. Turns out what cost around $300 in 2007 now costs nearly $1,000 in some cases, because these devices are not made anymore, and they are only getting more and more hard to find. So the eBay prices for these devices, and a lot of them don't come up that often, and when they do, they're expensive. So that wasn't really an option for me. So I had to dig a little bit deeper, and I found that you know, there's various levels of time-based correction devices, and it turns out if you're willing to settle for a less professional version of this, you can resort to using various VCRs have time-based correction built into them. And it turns out most of the super VHS players had this. A lot of them do. Unfortunately, the super VHS player that I have doesn't have it, so I couldn't use that. So I did a lot of digging around trying to find, you know, what was the right model that I should try to get. And it turns out some DVD players and DVD recorder devices actually have time-based correctors built into them as well. So the device that I ended up with for the time-based correction was a Panasonic DMR ES15 DVD recorder. I ended up getting it off of eBay for $77. So this was another gamble in this whole process, which was full of gambles, it turned out. Yet another roll of the dice here. Hopefully this was going to get me to where I needed to get as far as being able to capture these tapes in a good way. So ended up getting the device. I hooked it up. Basically the way to do this is you take your output coming out of the VCR into the input of the DVD recorder, and then the output of the DVD recorder goes to the Elgato device, which goes to the PC. So that's sort of the signal path that I'm using, and turns out that this actually worked. This solved my problems. And again, I'm not an expert. There are probably there's tons of ways to do this, and you know, Technology Connections channel that I mentioned earlier that has the Betacam video, they also have a video about doing this, and their method is a little bit different, and that's fine. Everybody's got a different way to do this. This is how I ended up doing it, and I'm happy with the results. I think the quality turned out pretty good, and actually putting this through the time-based correction device, actually I think it makes the video a little bit better as far as the quality, and obviously it makes it so that the signal doesn't cut out when there's interference. And in fact, there's some instances where the tape hits a real rough spot where the pictures just kind of all over the place, and the time-based correction device makes it so that I can capture it. I mean, as it is on the screen. It doesn't solve the picture jittering or any of that, but it makes it so that at least that I don't miss any frames from the tape. So it's a one-to-one copy of exactly what's on the tape is exactly what gets captured, which is what I want. So that's what I've done, and I've gone through and captured lots of these home videos. There's still tons more tapes to get through. Most of these, like I say, are TV recordings, but I'm finding a lot of them, like this one, is unlabeled. What's on this? I don't know. I'm gonna have to look at all of these and find out. So I've gone through and done probably about 10 tapes so far, and got a lot of pretty good content from birthdays and Christmases of years past. It's a nice little time machine for me to relive those family memories. I don't think they'd be interesting to anybody but me and my immediate family, but it's a great thing that I'm glad that I'm able to preserve these before these tapes deteriorate into nothing. I mean, these things are already, I guess, probably coming up on 40 years old, and they're only just going to get worse and worse over time. So now is the time to capture these things and preserve these for posterity. So I'm happy to be able to do this, and I'm happy that to go on this journey and this quest and discover how to do this. And now I'm passing what I've learned along to you, and hopefully this knowledge is useful to somebody out there who may want to capture tapes on their own at some point. So hope you found this informative. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Thanks.
All right, you know what? This was dumb. Dump it. Trash it. This was garbage.